Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What is the role of the businesses in the private sector to not only create employment opportunities, but also to combat climate change? What is one United Nations agency, namely the UN Global Compact, doing to work with over 8,000 businesses? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other important issues. Welcome back to our program. The private sector plays a pivotal role in helping to create employment opportunities as well as to overcome many other problems such as illiteracy and to combat climate change. Today we're taking a look at one United Nations agency that's working with a large number of businesses in the United States and around the world. My guest today is an expert on this agency. My guest today is Mr. Georg Kell. Mr. Georg Kell is the Executive Director of the United Nations Global Compact, the world's largest voluntary corporate sustainability initiative. Mr. Kell also oversaw the conception and launch of the Global Compact's sister initiatives on investment and business education, the Principles for Responsible Investment, and the Principles for Responsible Management Education. Georg Kell, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thanks, Bill. Great to be here.
I appreciate you being with me again. Let's jump right into it, Georg. What exactly is the Global Compact? When was it started? Why was it started? What is your major mission?
The Global Compact was launched in the year 2000 here at the United Nations, and the call to business then and today was and is embrace principles in the areas of human rights, workplace, the environment, and good governance, anti-corruption, and take action to support tackling public policy priorities. And this double call, on the one hand, respect principles, do no harm. On the other hand, take action in support of, is addressed to CEOs. CEOs are asked to formally adopt the principles, to take a public stand, and they're also asked to disclose on a regular annual basis progress made. In the meantime, over the past 13 years, a number of important programs, activities have been created based on this call to action. And there are 8 global issue platforms up and running, massive, from women's empowerment to caring for climate. And in more than 100 countries, there are now organizations up and running permanently who undertake projects, initiatives of all sorts. So it has become de facto what you could call a network-based organization where business is getting involved in helping the United Nations to tackle some of the big challenges.
Mm-hmm. Now, how many, I mentioned over 8,000 businesses are involved with you right now. Why do businesses want to be part of the Global Compact? What is the compelling drive for them to be involved with the United Nations Global Compact?
There are at least 3 reasons. One is business has gone global while government is local. As business has migrated around the world seeking to invest in order to grow and to build markets, they're exposed to many challenges. Not unlike in the home country, often where they came from, they're facing daunting challenges, extreme poverty, dysfunctional public institutions, high degrees of violence. In such circumstances, businesses has a choice to make. They can either pretend it doesn't affect them, often at the risk of brand damage, or other infliction of damage, or they can try at least to make a difference at the workplace, in the community, in the marketplace. So there's a real value proposition for being part of the solution. Secondly, the Global Compact now offers an enormous amount of what we call learning tools, guiding kits. We have developed over 200 guidances in all issue areas and dilemmas you can imagine. Human rights in a supply chain, climate adaptation. So knowledge has been created in identifying what works. And thirdly, increasingly important, the Compact also offers a platform, an opportunity for individual companies to collaborate with others, with other like-minded companies, but also civil society, academia, and others who share the vision of collaborating to tackle the issues.
And if our viewers would like more information on the Global Compact, they can go to www.unglobalcompact.org and get a lot more information about what we're talking about today. Now, how are businesses selected? Do they come to you or do you reach out to them? And you have some strict criteria they have to meet in order to be part of the Global Compact. Right. Is that correct?
That is correct. Well, as a United Nations platform, we are not designed to become an exclusive club. That would actually be easy, you know, to build a club. There's so many clubs out there. We are meant to be universally appealing, and our mission is to win over actually all companies, because you can transform markets from within only if you have a critical mass. However, we're very strict in saying the intention has to be the right one, and you have to prove it over time. It doesn't matter where you start the journey. Some companies join already very advanced in some of the issues. Others start at the lowest rung of the ladder. What matters is they're willing to step on the escalator of change and to improve on a continuous basis. This is why this annual disclosure is so important. Now, of course, we know companies, some are quite advanced, some are less advanced, some are learning. So we also do annual surveys, and we offer different entry levels and different fast lanes, if you so want, you know, for beginners, for advanced, and for leaders at some level. So you have to recognize the reality of the on the ground, that organizations, you know, are at different levels of preparedness. What matters to us is the seriousness of the intent and the continuous evidence of improvement over time.
And this is so critical. Now, you do a periodic review, is that correct? You look at the businesses, you see if they're meeting the criteria. If they're not, you drop them. How many have you dropped? You started off with a handful of businesses 13 years ago, but you have a lot more, 8,000 now. But how many have you lost over the years?
Well, a couple of years ago, we started to really strictly enforce the annual requirement to disclose progress based on a very robust methodology, working with many other organizations in that field. And unfortunately, we had to delist already, I believe the figure is now 4,200 companies out of currently 8,000 active, meaning we would have 12,000 now if we had not delisted. And we hope that in future, you know, this share of companies that don't stay engaged and are not serious will diminish. It's very sad and disappointing when companies join and then they don't honor their own pledge. It's disappointing, obviously. But with voluntary initiatives, it's the nature of the beast, you know. We have no enforcement. We have only the power of the business case. So we are confident that over time, as the business case is getting stronger for corporate sustainability, we're confident that more companies will actually get much more serious.
Now, back in September of 2013, you had the UN Global Compact Leaders Summit, which was held in New York, I guess.
Correct.
What exactly was the purpose of that, and who were some of the key players, and what came out of it?
Well, every 3 years we convene CEOs back. We had 1,000 CEOs here from, I believe, 120 countries. And the purpose was threefold. On the one hand, setting strategic direction for the future. At the Leaders Summit, we introduced what we call an architecture for business engagement. We're very ambitious now, you know, going to scale on all of the issues. Secondly, we also supported strongly our country networks, which increasingly are on the driving edge, bottom-up change. So we had a lot of support activities for local networks. And we launched a couple of new, what we call issue platforms, because we still had some gaps here and there. Among them, business for peace, and business and sustainable agriculture, and business and education. And now the United Nations has a pretty comprehensive portfolio where business can engage on almost all public priorities, you know, where the business contribution is so important to make progress. So the summit delivered on all of these three.
Business for peace.
Yeah.
And that's on your website,
yes.
unglobalcompact.org. Okay, and as I think of businesses, years ago, the main purpose of the business was to deliver a product, whatever it might be it in the manufacturing or service industry or whatever it might be, and they looked at the bottom line and they wanted to, in most cases, provide dividends to their shareholders. But it seems as though that their philosophy is expanding. They're starting to connect these issues. You talk about the food supply, we talk about lack of water in many parts of the world, talk about climate change, which is changing the whole world.
Right.
We see it every day. There are more and more scientific studies.
Right.
Do you see that there's really a shift in the thinking of the CEOs of a large number of businesses? Now, admittedly, if all business could have that shift, certainly we could help create this better world more quickly. But do you see that that's taking place?
Yes, absolutely. We have the evidence, actually. We did a big survey with 1,000 CEOs. Over 70% of the CEOs recognized that sustainability is critical for business success and future. And just to be very straight on this important issue, the Global Compact actually postulates quite clearly that financial success is, of course, a necessary ingredient for business success, and it remains so. So that doesn't change. But what has changed is that financial success over time can only be assured if there's also social responsibility, environmental stewardship, and good governance. In other words, if as a company, now that you are globally integrated, connected in the value chain, if you fail either on the environmental front, on the social front, or on the good governance front, you won't make it anyway. You will not financially be successful either. So what really has changed is that what economists call the non-traditional financial issues have become material for long-term financial success. And that is because technology has been evolving, transparency, you can no longer hide the dark sides, even not deep down in your supply chains. Remember Bangladesh recently? You can no longer really pretend not to know. Secondly, because of private sector becoming ever more important in the daily lives, the private sector also is taking over more responsibilities because its role has expanded. So the definition between public and private has shifted, and it puts greater opportunities on the business agenda, but also greater responsibility. And power and responsibility cannot be separated. So in that regard, it's an evolution. It's actually what you could call the logical next step for market-based approaches.
It certainly is. And our viewers can go to leaderssummit2013.org and get more information on what happened at that summit. We were talking about the climate, and this is, I think it's just been a chasm of a shift in thinking. People are coming to the conclusion, just about every poll you see in the United States and around the world, that climate change is here and that there are a lot of negative effects of climate change. We see the typhoon that went through the Philippines. We see Hurricane Sandy came to the coast. The glaciers are melting. You see that the oceans are rising. There's desertification taking. And this has to be in the best interest of businesses to start looking at this, because they're going to be adversely affected by this. If they have businesses that happen to be in areas that are going to be flooded, if there are storms coming through that area that wipe out their plants, or if they have to pay the taxes to fund building levees around places like Miami, Florida, or wherever it might be, or certainly in Bangladesh that gets flooded periodically, and just about every area is experiencing this. But they really are going to have to be more involved in the future, will they not?
Yes, you're absolutely right. And one of our biggest global platforms called Caring for Climate, we have over 400 companies in there, and all of them are committed to reduce carbon emissions and to engage in a positive way with policymakers in carbon pricing. Now, you also know, while people are very much aware that global warming is man-made, and the scientific evidence now is 95%, as they call it. In other words, it's overwhelming. Despite that, most people are not yet really willing to take action. Everybody still is waiting for everybody else to take action, because most consumers, investors are actually very short-term in their outlook on life, and so are we in our own consumption behavior. Let's face it, we're all part of it. So it is a very delicate situation we are in, and no doubt, the wake-up calls are getting stronger, and the longer we wait, and that's a tragedy, the higher the costs of adaptation will be. So it would be wise and to take action right now, ideally by yesterday. The good news is that working towards low carbon economies, green technologies, there's a lot of money to be made, and a lot of new business can grow in there. And it has started already. Many new industries are emerging, many new companies or existing ones are expanding or repositioning. But what it really matters is that the incentive structure also is adopted accordingly. So far, it's still cheaper to pollute and to have a cost advantage in the short run and not to bother about the long-term consequences, because the negative impact of high polluting, high carbon emitting activities doesn't count yet. You know, you don't have to pay for the negative things you do. What you put in the air, presumably, you know, who cares? And that's the big thing what will change, because the air is so precious for life and we're all discovering it. And you just have to go to China to find out how precious it is.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is an independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. Today, we're taking a look at the role of the private sector in helping to do a variety of things, such as create employment opportunities to combat climate change and many others. My guest today works with a very interesting group at the United Nations, the UN Global Compact. My guest today is Mr. Georg Kell. Mr. Georg Kell is the Executive Director of the United Nations Global Compact. Georg, we're talking about climate change, and the UN, one of the strengths of the United Nations has been it's been able to bring the countries of the world together to have conferences periodically. The UN cannot impose on the countries. They have to decide what they're going to do to combat climate change. And of course, we think back to 1992, the UN Conference on Environment and Development in Rio de Janeiro, and then in 2012, the Rio Plus 20. But this past year, there was a conference in Warsaw in 2013. In November, there was a conference in Warsaw, Poland, and that was under the framework for the Climate Change Convention. But what role did your group play, Global Compact play, at that conference as far as to bring the business people together and to hammer out a strategy to hopefully move aggressively to reverse this climate change situation?
The Global Compact is working very hard to mobilize business worldwide, from China to Brazil, from South Africa to Norway, from Canada to New Zealand, to show that low carbon solutions actually work and that we can move towards a low carbon economy. And to that effect, Caring for Climate, our platform, is the official partner now of the Conference of Parties negotiating climate issues at the global level. And in Poland, we had our first, pilot phase of interfacing policymakers with business leaders, where business leaders communicate to policymakers, look, we can do it. If there's a political will, we have the technological solution. That's basically the core message. So we're building up Caring for Climate now for the next meeting in Peru, and then 2015 in Paris, at which date world governments have actually committed to agree on a binding framework to deal with global warming. So our role is really to break down some of the barriers and to bring the business voice to the table, those companies, I should really say, who actually believe and can demonstrate that low carbon emissions is a model they not only are happy with, but they can financially be very successful with.
And our viewers can go to another website, caringforclimate.org, and find out what happened in Warsaw, Poland at this conference in November of 2013. Correct. And get much more information about it. You were talking about the situation about alternative forms of energy, clean energy we call them, and we see today that the fossil fuel industry has a tremendous impact, and they provide a large part of our power, obviously, or the fuels to develop our power. But still, by the same token, if we look at this, if you look at coal, which is one of the dirtiest fossil fuels, it is polluting. You mentioned China. China has a tremendous problem with pollution, primarily caused by coal and wood burning activities that take place there. But should we not take a look at this and see what we're doing to support the fossil fuel industries? For example, they receive huge subsidies, they get tax breaks, they create really environmental damage in just about every place where you have a coal-burning facility. I'm not picking on coal, but true with oil and the rest of them too. No, we don't want to do that. But my point is, shouldn't we just look at this and say, do we really need to provide the subsidies, and we should start looking at clean forms of energy like solar, wind, different ones like that, and maybe level the playing field, because the playing field seems to be tilted, I may be wrong, seems to be tilted in favor of the sort of the dirty industries or the dirty fuels.
Well, each country has grown historically, so there is a history behind industrialization, and the short answer to your very important question, I believe, is that we have to learn to account for negative externalities, meaning if we put carbon into the air, we have to cost it. It does cause damage. It's that simple. And so far, you know, polluting the air by and large is free. And this is the challenge humanity is facing now, that we have to account for negative impact. And by implication, if we did that, we would indeed level the playing field, and other forms of energy or less polluting forms would become more competitive. They're actually worldwide, you won't believe it, the figure is $500 billion are worldwide spent every year just to subsidize very polluting fossil fuel industries. 500 billion. That is an enormous amount that distorts not only the competitive environment for cleaner energy production, but it also contributes directly to do more harm, no doubt. So we have to find a way out of this, and so doing away with what you could call perverse subsidies would be the first logic step to do, absolutely. And secondly, I have no doubt that over time we just need to price carbon. There's no way around. We need a global price for carbon. Already it's emerging in some countries, in some provinces or states like California and so forth. China has 8 pilot phases going on right now. But clearly we need to work towards a carbon price, because that is the only big-time catalytic, incentive that levels the playing field and accounts for the negative impact that pollution, CO2 emissions actually cause. And this is where the world is heading to. The question is, when will such a price be established, and then, of course, at what level? On business, I can tell you the great news is that more and more companies already anticipate the carbon price in their own long-term investment decisions, because the writing is on the wall. Let a few more Sandys hit the world, then public opinion will flip just like this overnight, and everybody will wake up to the realities. So you have to be prepared for that. And this is a very likely scenario to play out pretty soon, I would guess. Actually, I almost predict within the next 5 years it will happen worldwide. The writing is on the wall. So working towards carbon pricing and full accounting of negative externalities is the way to go.
That's right. We need to look at the total picture and not just say, well, this is easy to pull.
Right.
To drill oil or something like
Bill,
that.
That's why I'm very careful also even with naming industries, because even within industries you have an enormous potential of innovation. And as an engineer, I know the moment there is a political will, there is a solution. You could produce electricity 100% clean of emissions by coal. Of course, it will cost. CCS technology is up and running, but it's not yet viable. We could totally reuse all our material we use in our electronics gadgets, which are highly toxic partly and have a huge environmental footprint. We could reuse them 100%. Technology is available on the shelf, but the incentive structure is not yet there. So the market isn't really incentivized yet to go clean. And that's what I think has to happen.
So we need to level the playing field and provide the incentives, and then we will see.
Then let technology and markets and competition come in, and they will find the best solution. Politicians are always bad in outguessing which solution will be the right one. Yeah? That's why I'm always very careful not to identify one or the other.
Exactly.
A lot of people claim, I know what the next 5 breakthrough innovations are, which would bring betterment to the world. Well, hang on, okay, let the market test it first.
Don't be too quick.
Right.
Exactly. Well, in the last minute or so we have, Georg, this is a very hard question in a short time frame. What do you see as some of the major challenges for the global compact as you move even further into climate change and the other issues?
Well, actually, my biggest concern is actually global peace. You won't believe it. I think in human history, humans are always foolish enough to self-destruct. And now as power, as they say, is fragmenting and the world order seems to be a little bit imbalanced. Support for multilateralism and global approaches is weakening, very tragic. We should revive the founding spirit of the United Nations. Peace is the ultimate public good. Secondly, I think also we should be concerned about social inequality. It's on the rise worldwide. It's a huge issue. You know, when children are born into poverty and are condemned to be poor just by the fact that they're born unlucky with an unlucky star, this breeds social discontent. The economists predict 60 countries are for next year in danger of social unrest. These are big issues. So inequality, I think, number 2. And number 3, I would argue, global warming, the biggest of the mother of the challenges, you know, how to cost the air and how to create something that is fair, that accounts both for what happened in the past and how we steer the future. Pretty tall orders, I know.
No, but right on target too, because if I were a business CEO, I'd realize I can't build a business in a war zone unless I'm selling arms.
Exactly.
And if I'm living in poverty, I can't buy your product.
Exactly.
So it's in my best interest to learn a lot more about this. But these are very important issues, and you're certainly focusing the spotlight on that. And we would encourage everyone to look at the UN Global Compact. But Mr. Georg Kell, the Director of the United Nations Global Compact, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Great being here.
Thank you. I'm Bill Miller. Thanks for joining us on today's Global Connections program.